Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Cormor Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap Season 2, Episode 16. A video that should have been out last week, except that a computer glitch basically deleted all of my work. So the moral of this story is save your work, and I'm sure that's a lesson that I will continue to fail to heed. The episode is titled Freedom, and was directed by Alan J. Levi, who directed my favorite from the first season, Kamikaze Kid, as well as this season's What Price Gloria. As I probably mentioned before, he also did some work on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. The episode was written by Donald P. Belzerio and Chris Rapunzel, who spent a lot of his time directing, or rather writing, episodes of my favorite TV shows, including Lois and Clark, The X-Files, and Briscoe County Jr. The episode's description reads as follows. As an American Indian, Sam escapes from jail to get his grandfather back to the reservation so he can die at home. The episode takes place on November 22nd, 1970, and originally aired on February 14th, 1990, Valentine's Day, or as I like to call it, St. Valentine's Beheading Day. Now, as a kid, I absolutely despised this episode. I thought it was incredibly boring. That's one of the reasons why, as I grew older, I continued to avoid this episode. But that's not the only reason. I tend not to like stories about Native Americans in television. And the main reason for this is, at best, those stories are cliched. At worst, they are downright disrespectful. So even when the DVDs came out, even as I grew into adulthood, I continued to avoid watching this episode. And I did not expect it to improve upon rewatch. But, strangely enough, it did. It's still not an episode that I'm going to rush out to watch, but this mostly seems like a respectful portrayal of a Native American tribe. AlicePlace.com states that this episode is very informative about the tribe that is portrayed in this episode. But more than that, the story at its heart really isn't about Native Americans. It's about a guy who's reached the end of his life and wants to end it on his term. He doesn't want to be strapped to a bed with tubes sticking out of him. He wants to die on his terms. And that is a story that my 12-year-old self would have had no appreciation for whatsoever. Whereas, as an adult, I appreciate that tale quite a bit more. I appreciate the topics that this story brings up. And at times I kind of wish it went a little deeper, though I can understand why a 90s TV show would not really want to get into that. I mean, even today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a television show that discusses these issues. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I now believe this episode is great. It's certainly not. But my appreciation for it has greatly improved over what I once thought of it. Sam leaps into an interrogation room where he instantly finds himself getting the snot beat out of him by Sheriff Taggart, played by Leon Rippey, who I recognized immediately as having guest starred on Star Trek The Next Generation in the season finale of Season 1. He was one of the people that Data revived in the Season 1 finale. Sam gets some good licks in, but it's 2-on-1, and he ultimately ends up losing the fight. He's dragged to his cell where he encounters Joseph. He looks himself in the mirror and notices that he's Native American, which he says out loud. And Joseph ends up saying, "Hey, it could be worse. You could be a white man." And credits. Leon Rippey, by the way, was in 11/22/63, a Hulu series based on the Stephen King novel of the same name, led by James Franco. He was in a season of Blacklist, the movie The Patriot, and was in the series Deadwood, as well as the Deadwood movie, which was his last appearance in 2019. Unclear whether he's done acting or not, but he's quite up there in age. All in all, he has 65 credits to his name. Meanwhile, Joseph is played by Frank Salcedo, who made an appearance on Jag, which was Donald P. Belzerio's other series, Walker, Texas Ranger in 6 episodes, the movie Almost Heroes, and an episode of Angel. He died on July 3rd, 2009 at the age of 80. When we come back from the credits, we learn a little bit more about Sam's predicament. Apparently, he's there because he both got kidnapped him out of a nursing home at Joseph's request, as well as borrowing, as Joseph would like to say, a vehicle, aka stealing. The next morning, Sam hides under the blankets of the bed. The sheriff wanders by and wonders where George is, the person that Sam leaped into. He goes to investigate and then ends up getting punched by Sam leaping out in surprise at the sheriff, knocking him out. Joseph and Sam escape using the vehicle that Sam borrowed, and away they go. In the next scene, we are introduced to Joseph's granddaughter, played by Gloria Hayes, who has 22 credits to her name, including an episode of Knight Rider and T.J. Hooker. She is the grandson of Joseph and the brother of George, and she is curious as to where they exactly are, while the sheriff looks like he's ready to do some hunting as he prepares a rifle. He informs her that they escaped from jail. Susan wants to return Joseph to the nursing home, but the sheriff points out that he is now broken out of a nursing home, broken out of jail, as well as stolen a car. The last thing that's going to happen when he catches Joseph is being returned to a nursing home. And one gets the impression that what's going to happen, at least in the sheriff's mind, is that Joseph is going to end up dead by shotgun. Sheriff leaves the office and Susan takes off after him, asking if she can go, which he initially says yes, and then asks if she is a licensed marshal in the state of Nevada, and of course she's not. So, nope, you can't go. Just kidding. Ha, I'm gonna go kill your grandfather now. He doesn't exactly say it like that, of course, but it is heavily implied. What a jackass. We cut to Joseph and Sam on the road, and eventually Joseph starts coughing up a lung, pretty literally. Sam stops the car and then deduces with his mad doctoring skills that Joseph has emphysema, which he knew from the start. Sam insists that they need to go to the hospital, but Joseph is dead set against that. He wants to be taken home, and Sam asks, "Are there doctors where your home is?" And Joseph lies and says there is, which is when Al appears at the 10-minute mark, a little bit later than the norm, and informs Sam that there is no help for Joseph at the reservation. Sam asks where the nearest hospital is, which turns out to be 50 miles back in the other direction. But as they have this conversation, Joseph exits the car, and Sam goes after him, saying that he can't run away. And Joe is saying that he is not running away, he is merely watering the plants, i.e. going to the bathroom. As Joseph conveniently goes off to water the plants, Sam ends up asking Al what's going on here, and Al gives the usual background information about who Sam is, which happens to be George, the grandson of Joseph, who broke Joseph out of a nursing home while stealing a vehicle in the process to take his grandfather to a reservation. Sam believes he's there to save Joseph's life, but Al says no, you are here to help him die. And Sam says that he can't help him die. He's a doctor, or at least he used to be. And this expressed attitude by Sam is something that I am of two minds of. On the one hand, Sam, as a former doctor, should know that it's not as simple as that. That being a doctor, there's more to just saving lives. Because there is sometimes where you can't save a life, where a patient is going to die no matter what. In the case of terminal illnesses or cancer, some people elect not to have procedures done, either because the benefit doesn't outweigh the drawbacks. For instance, a cancer patient doesn't want to spend the rest of their lives in hospitals if they're only going to get like a couple of months, a year, or maybe longer, and maybe that determination is that it's worth it. Sometimes it's a quality of life issue, other times it's financial. Sometimes being a doctor means saving lives, other times it means making the remaining time comfortable and accepting that your patient is going to die, either because there's nothing you can do for them or because that's what they choose. And Sam should know all of that. On the other hand, I can understand why this would be antithetical to what Sam does. Why he can't understand that he's leaping in to help somebody die, when usually it's to help save somebody. Al ends up telling Sam that the state and his sister will not let Joseph go back to the reservation because they consider it too dangerous. And Sam thinks they have a point. Al ends up pointing out that Joseph does not want to spend the last year of his life confined to a bed, looking like a pincushion. And Sam says, he'll be alive. And Al replies, well, maybe being alive is not enough. And I'm sorry to tell you, Sam, but I'm completely on Al's side here. Joseph re-enters the scene and says, a good life deserves a good death. Sam insists that he take Joseph back to the nursing home so that he can be with family and friends. Yeah, but Sam, that's not what Joseph wants. That is not what Joseph's wishes are. Wishes that you should be respecting and clearly are not. Oh, and by the way, the only family that Joseph has is Suzanne and you, who he hasn't seen since he was 14. I get that you have a savior complex, but maybe you should know a little something more about the situation before passing judgment. If you were his doctor, this would not be your call. This would be Joseph's call, and you would have to respect that decision. And while Sam's attitude here is annoying the crap out of me, this is one of the draws for me for this episode, this argument, this conversation. Al and Sam continue to argue, and Joseph starts to take off down the road. Eventually, Sam agrees to take him to the reservation, but only if he will see a doctor when he gets there. Before that, during the argument with Al and Sam, Al ends up pointing out there's a sheriff who wants to kill them both because he doesn't like them, and he doesn't like Indians. So going back is not much of an option. Skipping through a scene that involves the sheriff and the daughter and his deputy, played by Tom Skerritt, we again end up back at a Sam and Joseph scene, as Joseph insists on stopping at a trading post. While going into the scene, we notice that Sam notices an oxygen tank, which of course will come into play. Sam ends up talking to Al about a treat that he used to enjoy at the store, and apparently George has a similar taste because Joseph brings it up. And Al points out to Sam that George, in a weird coincidence, had his father die at the age of 21 too. Now, this is actually curious because Al is actually not supposed to be telling Sam things he doesn't know already, and that includes when his father died. They gather everything they are interested in buying, and then Sam wonders how to pay for it. He reaches into his coat and takes out a gun and points it at the shopkeeper, who now thinks he's being robbed. But apparently, that's not Sam's intention. He just wants to trade the gun. Okay, Sam, you dumbass. You're not this stupid. Look at the way that Sam pulls this gun out of his coat. What is this person supposed to think? If your intention isn't to rob this person, then why are you taking the gun out with your finger on the trigger, pointing it directly at the shopkeeper? Sam is not this stupid, so this is kind of a dumb moment. Anyway, he ends up trading the gun for the stuff that they decided they wanted, and also for the oxygen tank for Joseph. During the trip, Suzanne ends up calling over an AM radio that happened to be in the truck that they're driving. She says that she wants Joseph to come back so that he can be at their wedding. Yeah, only she's not currently getting married. She means in the future. Yeah, but this thing is, you're gonna have to get married real quick in order for that to be a reality, because Joseph is gonna die within less time than she has to get married. Does Susan know that? I'm not really sure at this point. The sheriff ends up piping in saying, hey, turn yourself in and I'll recommend that the judge go easy on you. And Joseph ends up emphatically saying no, repeatedly. Joseph and Sam end up borrowing, I say in quotation marks, a couple of horses, where Joseph starts to paint them, and we learn a little bit about the Shoshone Indian tribes, and Al is all enthusiastic about this, watching the past come to life. They soon encounter the sheriff from a distance, and this is not a friendly encounter, as Joseph and the sheriff end up trading gunfire. In the process, Sam ends up getting shot, but apparently not too seriously. And as Sam says that it burns, Joseph lets him know, hey, that's a good thing. It means you're still alive. Somehow, they manage to get away. At night, they are both tired, and they seek shelter. They go to make a fire when Sam realizes he doesn't have any matches. And Joseph says, here, I'll show you an old Indian trick. Before, he simply pulls out a lighter. And this is a nice little subversion of the usual stories about Indians that I appreciated. During the course of this scene, we have a conversation where Joseph ends up asking, don't you think eventually you're going to be reunited with your father? And Sam simply says, no. Now, this is interesting. It makes sense with Sam being an atheist, or a scientist, rather, that he would be an atheist. It would make sense if that were his attitude. But the funny thing is that throughout the series, they talk about Sam's leaps being taken over potentially by God. And from a person who is an atheist, or is at least demonstrating atheist beliefs right here, you would think that Sam would not approve of that attitude and would only imagine scientific possibilities. Now, that's not necessarily a problem because people are contradictory all the time. And for me, I don't necessarily understand. Well, I do understand, but I don't believe there needs to be a war between science and spirituality and religion. The scientists will explain chapter and verse how something came to be, and the religious person or the spiritual person will be like, hey, that crazy God, he knew what he was doing, didn't he? In real life, there is a war between science and religion. Not necessarily spirituality, but definitely between science and religion. And I'm saying there's no need for that war, for exactly the reasons I just stated. This is another scene where I would like to have seen them go a little deeper here, to get a better understanding of what Sam believes, his attitudes, because we get a taste of it, but we don't go any deeper, and I wish we did. This is an opportunity to get to know Sam Beckett better as a character. What we get seems to be a contradiction. Sam does not believe that he will be reunited with his father, probably meaning that he doesn't believe in the afterlife, but yet at the same time, he believes that God exists because he thinks that it's a possibility that God has taken over his leaps. It'd be interesting to see Sam in this scene reconcile all of that. But of course, we don't get any of that. They continue the journey, and Joseph ends up lamenting the fact that there are fewer and fewer of them left. There are fewer and fewer people who remember what they once were. And Sam takes this moment to argue that's all the more reason to stay alive, to pass those memories down. Joseph ends up saying that they don't want to remember, they have no heart for it, and that they are ashamed of what they are. Not to mention, once again, Joseph, either way, is not going to be alive for too much longer. Whether he dies now or in a year, that's really not enough time. They continue to play cat and mouse games with the sheriff, and eventually Joseph is kicked off his horse and he seems to get away. So they are down to one horse. Sam has Joseph up on the horse while he walks alongside it as they continue to make their way to the reservation. Somehow Suzanne catches up to them and argues that Joseph should be back in the nursing home, arguing that she does not have the ability to take care of him. And Sam says that he takes care of himself. But with his emphysema, which pretty much seems to answer the question whether she knows or not, how much longer is he going to be able to do that? And then Sam kindly says, I believe that is the point. The sheriff is hot on his tail. Sam leaves Suzanne and Joseph to go and confront the sheriff. They engage in battle. Sam becomes a victor, and it almost seems for a moment like Sam is going to scalp the sheriff, but then doesn't. Joseph ends up joining the fray, shooting away at the downed sheriff. The sheriff fires back, and Joseph ends up getting hit. Sam then ends up scooping up Joseph, who's still alive, and heads towards the river, the reservation just being across it. The sheriff threatens to shoot Sam, if he continues to cross that river. And Sam turns to him and says, in a very well-acted speech by Bakula, by the way, that all Joseph wanted to do was to die in peace, to die his way, not in a building with people he didn't know. Joseph turns away from him and starts to cross the river, and does not end up getting shot. He gets across. Joseph is home, and that is where Joseph dies. And having completed his mission, Sam leaps. Like I said, I hated this episode as a kid. I don't particularly love it now, but I have a greater appreciation for the story that they were telling. Definitely not something I'm going to rush out to see anytime soon, but it has its merits. The next episode of the series that we're going to watch, when I get around to it, is Goodnight, Dear Heart. Another episode that I did not particularly care for. For the rest of the season, the episodes are pretty hit and miss with me, as far as whether I liked them or not. I don't expect this episode to improve upon rewatch. My problem with that episode is its very existence, honestly. I don't think it fits for a Quantum Leap episode. But anyway, that's all I got for you for this video. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Production. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment in this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.